career development and so on. But let's be clear as we get started that open access journals, if they're reputable open access journals, and you should always, as an author, be aiming to publish your work in the best journals possible. Of course, that goes without saying, but we'll talk in a minute about how you can navigate the choppy waters of predatory publishing and so on, because of course you want to publish your work in a journal that's reputable, so look for peer review. All major open access initiatives for scientific and scholarly literature, they insist on the importance of peer review. So if your journal is not going to peer review your work properly, then you should not be publishing your work in that outlet. Peer review is, of course, the fundamental cornerstone of academic publishing. If you're selecting a journal that's not going to be using peer review, then walk away. You should be, as all of the Bentham Science journals do, using full peer review. That's the basis of publishing. So open access, of course, it's compatible with all of those things that we as authors expect to see in a reputable academic journal if done right. So Bentham Science journals use peer review. They, of course, generate revenue, of course, but that's part of the open access model. You are getting copyright as an author. You're getting a print copy if you want. Your work is preserved. You gain the prestige from publishing in an open access journal. The papers are high quality. Your career will be advanced. All of the journals are indexed. These are the kinds of things to look for when selecting a journal, when going in and thinking, should I publish my work in that open access journal? These are the kinds of issues that you will consider as an author. Where did open access come from as a publishing model? We're all quite familiar with it these days, of course, as authors, but the history of this is interesting. The history of this is related to what we call a crisis in pricing. Over the years, back in the day, as the internet was developing, as online sources for research were getting more and more mature around the world, the publishing companies at the same time were charging, as you can see here on this graph from 1985 to 2005, more and more for their content. So as you'll be aware, traditional published journals, those are the journals from the old days, of course, where you submit, you don't pay a fee, and then the content is sold on by the publisher to libraries, to universities, to medical schools, to institutions around the world. So a crisis in pricing was seen throughout the 1990s into the mid-2000s, and this correlated with the rise of the internet, led to a rise in online sources and the origins of the open access, open research movement. So we saw flat to declining collections budgets, more demand for newer, expensive resources around the world, and publishers charging greatly increased prices for serials and for electronic resources. So of course, researchers kind of moved on this. They went into the open access, open research movement, and we started to see a rise in those online sources, rapid dissemination of new research, and of course, the internet. I don't need to tell you this. The internet led to much better connectivity between researchers, epitomized actually in recent movements around the world, but this is probably the most famous of the open research, open access movements that we've seen, Plan S, a movement by the European Union to mandate that any research funded by the European Union, by grants from the EU, should be published, has to be published in an outlet, in an open access outlet that is free to everybody. So the EU says, Coalition S says that, hey, we're going to pay for research to be done. We want that research to be open. We want that research to be accessible. We want anybody, anywhere in the world, to be able to download and reuse that research. So Plan S, that's one of the most famous manifestations of the open research movement. So open access to research will mean, of course, that it's the research universally available online. There's going to be no barriers to access. Publishers can relicense that to allow distribution, and you can allow yourself, the author, reuse as long as attribution is given. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But of course, reputable open access publishers like Bentham Science publishers permanently archive their content in internationally recognized repositories, for example, PubMed Central. So another tick there. If you're thinking about which journal to use for your next research publication and you're considering one of the Bentham Science publisher journals, you can think, well, these journals use full peer review. These journals have reputable editorial boards. You can go and you can check. And of course, the content that gets published in these journals is permanently archived in internationally recognized repositories. However, people often point to this publishing industry overall, traditional journals and hybrid journals and online open access journals, and they think, hey, what's going on? We're researchers. We're doing all the research work. We're doing all the peer review work. We're not getting paid for it. We're often also acting as editorial board members, academic editors. So people often ask, published article be under the absolute control of a publisher if that publisher is only playing a limited role at the end of the process? So subscription-based access to research, as you may very well be aware, that's a legacy of print-based economics. And many people would say, many people would argue that the open access, open research model makes a lot more sense in today's online environment. Another good question that you might ask in this context, though, is what's the difference, Gareth, between the different kinds of journals that we see out there on the market? And I use jazz as an analogy for this. Traditional journals, traditional jazz bands, they publish content for free, as you'll be aware. The content's then sold back to universities and libraries. That's the traditional, the old-fashioned model. We've all walked down to our university library to check the recent journal content. Often, however, this content is behind a paywall. We've all also been in that position, trying to download a PDF from a journal, content that we want to access, we want to read, we want to use for our own research, and finding that we can't because our university, our library, our institution doesn't have a subscription to that journal. So that's a problem for many researchers. That's the root, isn't it, of the open research movement. Some colleagues can't access our papers. So the other side of the coin, called gold open access, these are modern jazz bands, modern open access journals. They publish for an article processing charge. The article processing charge, however, charged to the author, charged to the institution, has to be charged after acceptance. So that's another tick on your list of things to think about, things to check up on when picking a journal.